Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. I'm joined on the podcast today by Joly-Battaglini, CMC consultant and founder of PharmDev, specialising in CMC regulatory strategy. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce two members of the PharmaSource team. Dora Wells is our new editor, and she's speaking to Tamina Thakur, who's been working on a special CDMO news analysis project that we're revealing this week and is completely free for listeners of this podcast. Over to Dora.
I'm joined today by PharmaSource's very own Tamina Thakur, who can update us on a special project we're revealing this week. Tamina, welcome.
Thank you, Dora.
So can you tell us a little bit about the CDMO news analysis you've been working on and what value it brings?
It's finally live, and as you already know, that over the last 8 months, we have been tracking every significant CDMO announcement, whether it's an investment, partnership, senior appointment, mergers and acquisitions, or any facility expansion. And altogether, that's almost 446 announcements since January 2025.
Wow, that is a big data set. So it's free to access on PharmaSource, right?
Yeah, anyone can download it straight from the site, and we update it daily, so it's always fresh.
Great. So give me the highlights then. What stood out in the data?
A few things, Dora, like out of all the news announcements where the company was known, the United States completely dominates with 43% of all announcements, and that's more than any other region by far. And it's a big gap to second one, which is China at around 9%. Which is being followed by the United Kingdom and Germany, each at about 7%.
Wow, it sounds like that reshoring manufacturing drive in the US is really ramping up the activity there.
Exactly. And when you look at investments, the US also leads the way. Like, of the $16 billion disclosed investment that we have tracked till now, the US accounts for over $10 billion, which is around 2/3 of everything disclosed. And the next biggest market is India at around $3.3 billion. And then Switzerland, Ireland, and Germany. And here, I would like to, add that this is just what's been made public. A lot of deals never reveal numbers.
Right. And was there a particular month that stood out?
I would say April 2025 was huge with more than $5 billion invested. And that spike was driven by several big ticket announcements, like Thermo Fisher pledged to invest $2 billion in US amid profit cut tied to China trade war. And the second one is Fujifilm Biotechnologies announced a 10-year manufacturing agreement with Regeneron, which is worth $3 billion. And Fujifilm is very interesting. They have recently just announced a similar partnership with Johnson & Johnson worth $2 billion.
Wow, makes sense. And in terms of types of activity, what was the most common?
I would say partnerships and facility expansions really dominate the news flow, which is being followed closely by executive appointments. Mergers and acquisitions and layoffs also pop up, but they are a smaller share.
Interesting. Anything else that stood out?
There are clearly some companies who are particularly active or noisy, if I can put it that way, like WuXi Biologics. They are incredibly active. Like 17 releases we have published since January. And I would get that's the indicative of how they are pushing back following the disruption the Biosecure Act caused to their business in the US. And after that, it's AGC Biologics with 10 announcements and then Lonza with 8, which also includes their significant news one Lonza strategy. And, overall, there is a huge amount going on in this space and it's generating lots of interesting data.
Great stuff. So if someone listening wants to explore this data for themselves, where should they go?
Yeah, it's very simple. Just head to pharmasource.global/analysis and you can download the full tracker for free. And we keep it updated every single day. It's especially useful for anyone keeping an eye on contract manufacturing trends, whether you are in strategy, business development, or just trying to follow the market.
Great. Thanks a lot for sharing, Tamina. Sounds like such a useful tool for keeping a pulse on the CDMO sector.
And now on with the interview with Joly-Battaglini, founder of PharmDev Consulting. Marin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. You've spent about 10 years in CMC development at Galderma before founding your own consultancy. So it'd be great to talk a little bit about your journey and what sparked your passion for CMC in the first place.
Oh, nice question. Well, I'm a pharmacist by training, and I also have a master's degree in regulatory affairs. And in fact, I started my career directly in pharmaceutical development and CMC topics without leaving them. And I think, yeah, one of the things that I really enjoy by being in this field is being able to work on technical topics, but also having all the regulatory aspects signed. So it's quite a good balance between both. And every project is unique, so I think you can stay in this field for many years without being tired of it.
Yes. When you were at Galderma then, what was it during that time that made you want to focus on helping early stage companies?
When I was at Galderma, well, it was the fact that I see there is a need, in fact, in CMC. CMC topics are often taken, I think, a bit late in development. And as we probably all know, it's always best to try to anticipate a certain number of activities. Doesn't mean that you necessarily do them earlier than they're needed, but the fact that you thought a little bit about it usually helps the journey of the product.
Your experience covers both small and large molecules.
Correct, yeah.
I wonder if you could maybe talk about what you find in terms of the differences between the two. I mean, how does that impact development working across those different modalities?
Small molecules, I guess, in a way, it's something that is pretty well known in the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, that's how the whole pharmaceutical industry more or less started. There's a lot of very nice key players out there that can help you being a partner, in fact, to manufacture small molecules. On the large ones, I think we face maybe a bigger variety, in fact, in the types of large molecules that are out there. We are now seeing that there are more and more nice key players that can help all types of companies also with the development of their large molecules. But probably you really need to go and find the one that is appropriate for your type of product, because in a way there is more variability in the sense that it will depend on the strain that you're using. It depends on the type of large molecule you're working on. All sorts of aspects that need to be taken into account.
How has it changed over the last decade or so? Are you seeing any shifts in how companies are approaching manufacturing?
Yes, well, I think more and more companies are looking really for partners and not subcontractors. I think that's one of the big shifts in the recent years, because we can also see that not only like small companies want to externalize their manufacturing, but also some of the large pharmaceutical companies are also doing it, whether it is because they don't have the expertise in-house or for other reasons. But I think there's more and more of a partnership being set between pharmaceutical companies and the CDMOs. And in fact, we're talking also much more about, there's a shift coming from CMOs, companies that were taking projects pretty late stage and often during the commercial phase. So it was a real transfer, and moving more into adding the D, development and being a partner throughout the development. And some are even going further, since they're even adding the R, so CRDMOs.
Which is a bit of a mouthful, that one, isn't it? There's a big difference, I think, between, it depends on people's background, but if you're working with a biotech where they've got existing pharma experience, or those who are coming up through academia perhaps, or a scientific background, when it comes to awareness about CMC and how to make it work, what does that sometimes look like in practice when you first meet a client? I mean, do you find that there's sometimes an education gap about how to get ready to go into clinical trials?
Yes, definitely. I think I mean it's not easy when you don't have a background, I think, in the pharmaceutical industry, where you haven't been in touch or have some awareness created around the fact, how do you build like a team and the project team, and what are all the different aspects. I think people coming from academia often have very nice ideas. Obviously, they know a lot about research. But one of the difficulties in the pharmaceutical field is that once you start development and once you start, in fact, either your GLP preclinical studies and even more your clinical studies, all sorts of regulatory aspects also come along. And so you have to work in a very constrained environment, and you cannot develop your product exactly the way you would like to develop it. So there is really a need to have the proper persons on board from the start to be able to accompany these company throughout these journey.
What happens if people don't do that? An example of a biotech who thinks they can maybe deal with the CMC later on. How is this? Does this ever happen? Like in your experience when you're meeting with clients, and how does it tend to backfire?
Yeah, I think it is something that can happen, and sometimes it's not even only with biotechs. I think there is a need to try to establish the targets a bit of your product as early as possible, the famous target product profile, and that's true for the small and the big companies. If you don't put on the paper early enough, and that's a living document, so things can evolve, that's not an issue, but trying to put on the paper what you would like to achieve with your product, I think is really important to do that as early as possible. So that then you can put in place the right partners. For example, if you're developing a product only for the US, well, maybe you'll go and look for manufacturers in the US. If you think about a worldwide program, well, maybe you'll go looking for manufacturers elsewhere, and you'll also put in place some strategies, maybe to have one first manufacturer for your early development, and then maybe adding some more as you move on in your development. So it's really about establishing a strategy. The pitfalls, if you don't do that, is that you're going to be most probably be able to go into your phase one. You're going to start really struggling when you enter phase two if you don't have the proper partners in place. And then it becomes very difficult to fix once you enter phase three, because authorities don't like changes. So you're going to have maybe more work to be done to be able to get back on the right path and meet the expectations, in fact, from authorities. And also, if some of the preliminary development work has not been done, well, maybe you have some gaps in the knowledge on your products that you will need to fill in. And as you fill them in, well, then other types of issues can happen. And so I think the biggest pitfall is not only it's going to cost you more, but it's going to cause delays also to your program.
Yes, of course. The costs and the delays, do they increase the further down the timeline you go?
Exactly. The more you push it, and the bigger are the costs and potentially the costs and delays. Yes.
If you go to understand then, Marin, what your recommended timeline would be, when to engage with CMC and what should happen when. So if you were to take a typical project going from preclinical, maybe all the way up to phase two, for example, what should happen across that timeline?
Well, I think while you're on your preclinical studies, you're fine more or less doing things, I would say, on your own without necessarily having a CMC person on board. Initial phase one studies are still okay, but I would say it's while you are running your phase one study that is important to start thinking really about the CMC aspects. And so having the right people on board that will be able to help you selecting the proper CDMO for your drug substance, for your drug product, and setting things correctly for the next phases. I would say phase two, yeah, it's between phase one and phase two, that's the right time to start thinking about all that, because usually phase one studies are relatively small. Expectations from authorities also in terms of requirements are obviously more limited, but the more you advance in your development, the more you have to meet the GMP requirements, and all the other also regulatory requirements increase. And so that's why it's also the right time to start putting all this in place, as well as your studies are much bigger. So you're going to need to be able to provide more products to maybe also resupply, because not only in terms of number of patients are the studies bigger, the countries involved, but also the length, the duration of the studies.
Thank you. What happens on the resourcing side for the biotech? At what point, I suppose, can they rely on consultants, and when should they start bringing in full-time CMC staff? I think it'd be great to understand that sort of, the requirements for having an in-house team versus having a virtual team, and how that changes over those stages.
As much as it is important to have a CMC representative on the team, I think there's no rush in needing to hire someone. You can perfectly work with consultants, I would say, for most of your development. Maybe I would say in an ideal scenario, try to hire at least one CMC person before your phase 3. Because while you'll be running also your phase 3, you're going to start preparing for the registration and slowly also start preparing for the launch. So if you're going really down that path, I think, the phase 3 time would be the right time to hire people. For companies and startups where, the model will be more to sell the product after phase 2, well, I would say don't bother hiring CMC people. You can work with consultants. Yeah.
Is it possible to work with the CDMO's resources on stuff like that, or do you feel like there needs to be an independent third party as well?
I think at some point it's good to have someone that in a way is the bridge between your CDMO and your sponsor. So it's someone who is usually, I would say, more contracted by the sponsor, but who's really going to be the link between both. So someone I would say that speaks the same CMC language as the CDMO and is capable of translating this for the rest of the startup, for example, team, and maybe also help, when reporting is needed, for example, to boards of investors or boards of directors, whatever their structure is. Yeah.
Let's talk then about partnering with contract development and manufacturing. How do you go about running a partner selection strategy? If you're helping a client evaluate CDMOs, what type of factors are those that you should consider? Because I guess obviously you want to look for someone, I suppose, with experience and a track record in your particular modality, the area that you're focused on. But what else goes into a good selection, RFP or RFI?
Yeah. Well, if you're working with small companies, very often it's important to be selecting really as a CDMO, so someone who has capacities also on the development side, because as we were just mentioning before, the resources on the company, the pharmaceutical company side, will be very limited on the CMC side. So there is a need to have some expertise also on the CDMO side, so that they can in a way fill in a little bit of that gap. Then, yes, as you mentioned, first of all, what is important is to establish a proper RFP so that it's clear what we are looking for. It will depend a lot on the type of products. Maybe for some products which are quite standard, well, you're going to have an offer in terms of potential CDMOs that is quite wide. There is also the sponsor needs to see, well, what is the best fit for them? Do they want someone who is maybe a relatively big CDMO but very well known, or do they want to prefer but who has maybe capacities all over the world, and so transfers are possible from one place to another? Or do they prefer working with a smaller company, maybe that fits more also the size of their company? So there's a need to establish all of these parameters. And I think that the selection then, now today, there's a very wide variety of types of products that companies are working on. So CDMOs are also trying to adapt to that. And often, yes, you will find maybe one or two potential CDMOs that are going to be fitting really your needs.
What would you say the ingredients are for a really successful partnership? So beyond costs and capabilities, what separates a good partnership from a great one?
Well, I think one of the other important key ingredients is flexibility, because while you're in development, it's never a smooth path. We always encounter challenges, but that's also the fun of it. So on the CDMO side, we need to have someone that has also the possibility to adapt to all the potential changes that we can have. And then it's really about building trusts. So, and I think that goes with having a proper communication between the pharmaceutical company and the CDMO, being honest and transparent about what is going on. There can be hiccups, issues can come from both sides, but I think that if you're transparent about it and you work really as one team, in fact, in the end, well, we can more or less overcome everything.
When you were talking about the pipeline just now, you were talking, I think, about the whole journey really up to commercial validation. Why do you think this long-term planning is so critical? I mean, because presumably when a biotech's they've raised funding and they're very focused on their next milestone, why would you encourage them to take that longer-term planning view? And what's the best way of working with CDMOs in that longer timeline?
Yeah, it's trying to build with them what I would call a development proposal. So that would take into account all the required clinical phases. I think what is important there is first on the pharmaceutical company side, assess whether the CDMO that you're about to select does have the capacities to support you all through development, or will you have to transfer at some point? It can be a strategy. Maybe that's the right choice at that point in development, but at least you know that at some point you're going to need to transfer elsewhere because maybe they don't have the capacities that you will need either for your phase 3 or for your commercial phase. And then it's also, so I think you're giving also an indication to the CDMO that you're not looking like for a one-shop manufacturer, but you're looking for someone to partner with on a midterm or even long term. So I think from the start, in terms of the relationship that you want to build, well, you're already setting a little bit the tone on what you are expecting. And the third aspect is, I would say, for the pharmaceutical company, is for them to already have some ideas about how much the different phases are going to cost. And so when they go back to their different boards, or when they ask for, they're looking for investors and money, well, at least they know from a CMC perspective more or less about the amounts we are talking about.
Thank you. Thank you. Whether they're going to be bought by a pharma company or take it up to a commercial stage themselves, they're going to be faced with various fast changing geopolitical realities that we have at the moment, supply chain vulnerabilities, there's potential tariffs, which seem to be on and off. How should companies be factoring these types of risks into CDMO selection? Because if you do it just purely based on price, you might end up with a very different answer of who to work with, or a very different continent for who to work with than if you were to take all of that into account. What would you typically recommend?
Yeah, I think it's something that is important to try to factor in. It's not an easy one because it's a very moving piece. But I think you need to first think about it's coming back, in fact, to your target product profile. Where would you like to have your product on the market? And even before being on the market, where would you like to run your clinical trials? Because that can already have some impact on the sites and the companies you might want to select. It's true that today, giving this kind of volatility in terms of the geopolitical situation, something I often recommend to my clients is, well, try to have a CDMO that is not too far from where you're planning at least to do your clinical studies, or the countries where you want to launch. But another strategy could also be, first, you select maybe someone that is a good compromise between price and location. And then again, you think about a strategy that would be, for example, more for life cycle management, where you would add maybe a manufacturing site that's closer to some of the countries where you would like also to manufacture your product. And it allows you to de-risk, because obviously if you have two CDMOs, to different manufacturers, if there's something that goes wrong with one, well, you have a backup.
What are the most common CMC mistakes you see early stage companies making? I mean, are there specific formulation or manufacturing decisions that might seem minor at the time but create big problems later on?
Yeah, I think we're probably coming back to the establishing, the proper team from the starts. And so without maybe working with the right subject matter experts, for example, on your formulation, well, you might have something that seems to be doable while you're on small scale, and you don't have to manufacture much product, but you might encounter some issues as you scale up, because I don't know, maybe some of the raw materials you would like to work with are not so easily available, or because the scale up of the manufacturer doesn't go as planned. It's on an industrial scale, for example, it doesn't work. Or I've seen formulations where people tell you, okay, this ingredient, well, each time you receive a new batch, you're going to have to adapt your formulation. Well, that's typically something that doesn't fly when you want to go to a CDMO and you start having industrial production. You have to have something that is robust, that is reproducible, and it doesn't also meet the GMP requirements. So you have quite a few problems there.
When you're working with investors and acquirers, you're providing the due diligence support. What kind of questions should investors be asking when it comes to due diligence?
Well, I think I would say some simple questions around the CMC part would be, it's coming back, to whom are your partners? Are you already it depends obviously at what stage of development we're talking about, but let's say coming around like a phase 2. So with whom are you working for the manufacturing? Is that a company capable of manufacturing also for much later stages and have the rights on GMP certificates, depending on when you plan on going? Things that are also important are like the shelf life, the storage conditions also of your product. Is the handling of your product, in fact, easy or not? This has obviously implication at the pharmacy or in hospital, depending on how it will be distributed, but also for transportation.
Looking ahead then, Marine, what trends do you see that are currently shaping the CMC landscape, whether it's new modalities or regulatory changes, manufacturing technologies? What do you see sort of coming down the line or already here that people need to prepare for?
So one of your questions earlier on was, the difference between small molecules, large molecules. What are the trends? I think so. In the recent years, we've seen that a very high increase in terms of large molecules coming in. But I think the small molecules are not dead. They're still there. I've seen things, for example, that thanks to artificial intelligence, it allows you obviously to screen much higher amounts of molecules and being able to find new small molecules that are very interesting. And that instead, of having like an injectable will allow you to develop like an oral form, which is more convenient for patients. But I think in the future, we're going to go more and have really a wide diversity of types of products out there. Obviously, probably with implying more and more technologies, so implying also more complex products. In terms of, I would say, regulations, we see that authorities are trying to adapt and at a fast pace, to first artificial intelligence, but also this wide variety of products. And I think one example is the ICH-M4Q that's under revision as we speak.
To keep up to speed with everything that's happening, I mean, what advice would you have around how people should keep up? Is there any reading or podcasts or webinars? Where do you go to keep your finger on the pulse?
Well, I think being part of some pharmaceutical associations or receiving newsletters like yours, for example, from PharmaSource, are an important source of information. You need obviously to keep up to date. It's not always easy to catch all the information. So people who are giving you the possibility to have already something that's a bit digested, it's great.
Well, I'm glad you like the newsletter. Thank you.
Yeah. They're very useful.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Luke. Bye.